I just want to make a Sigmund Freud video. That's it. That's all I want to do. And I want to discuss Freud's theory of religion, which is really just a reflection of his own personal psychological state. And the myth he has is the myth of the king and the brothers. So the king, he has all the power, he has all the women, he has all the stuff. And he's earned it because he really is the king. He's the chief of the tribe. And the brothers come, who just represent sort of the beta males. He's the alpha male. The beta males come along, and they think, this isn't fair. We have no women. We have no booty. We've got nothing. So they conspire to kill the king. And it's sort of ambiguous whether religion is the conspiracy in itself to kill the king, or if it's the aftermath. The aftermath is where they justify the killing of the king in some way or another. And occasionally they might ritualize it in the same way that Native Americans would kill buffalo, but they'd also celebrate the buffalo. Or Northern Europeans would hunt the bear, but they'd also celebrate the bear. So there's this weird sort of Nietzschean, Homeric respect for the enemy. That you kill your enemy, but you also respect and you venerate your enemy. So this is Freud's basic myth of the king. You can see how Freud felt this way personally, that he was the king of psychoanalysis, and then Jung came along and others came along who defied Freud. And he felt that he was the king, all these people were coming to defy him. Now, Judaism, as a religion, is distinct from traditional European mythology. Judaism says that Yahweh is God in the beginning and in the end. Now and forever, Yahweh is always at the top. He's the big king, he's the big chief. Everything he says is correct. And we are judged in accordance with his will. So King David is a righteous man, but he does some bad stuff, and therefore he has to defer to Yahweh. He's only good in the sense that he follows the will of Yahweh. And that's true now and forever. Now Christianity came and said, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they're wrong, and we need to change our ways. In Judaism, there's a traditional hierarchy of the Kohanim, the priest class, the Zadokites, the high priests. They're at the top, and they're generally correct. In the nation of Israel, the demos, the masses of the Jewish people, are wrong. So that is the hierarchy in Judaism, whereas in Christianity, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, the rabbis, the Kohanim, they're incorrect, they're wrong. And the nation of Israel is wrong as a priestly nation, and the people who are correct are the masses of the people, I'm trying to think of the name of the half-Jew, half-Arab peoples, the Samaritans. The Samaritans are to be brought in, they're to be grafted in. Nation of Israel who doesn't accept Christ is to be cut off. So there is this inversion there, where rather than having, the kings at the top are good, Yahweh at the top is good, and the masses at the bottom are evil and bad, and the Jewish people, who are a very small minority of the global population, are good, and the masses of the nations are in sin. Christ comes and inverts that and says, no, the masses are good, the nations are good, Israel's in sin, the Sadducees are in sin, the Pharisees are in sin. So he inverts that. And that inversion is not unique to Christ, and Christianity didn't invent this type of inversion. It has precedence in earlier European mythology. So Zeus, he contests the will of his father. And the will of his father is, well, we have before Jupiter, in the Roman context, we have Saturn. In the Greek, his name is Cronus. Before that, you even have Uranos. And Uranos is the sky god. He's the first sky god. You have Gaia and Uranos, earth and sky. Cronus rebels against him. Saturn is the Latin. Saturn rebels against him. And then later, Zeus/Jupiter rebels against his father. So there's this constant rebellion, this constant overturning of the elemental, the titanic, and then you finally get the Olympian, which is on the level of the human. You've moved away from these titanic forces of nature ruling over the universe, and now the universe is ruled over by a conscious personality, Zeus, Jupiter. Same thing happens in Norse mythology. So there are these giants, these primordial giants, who Odin actually descends from these giants, and these giants are the titanic elemental forces of nature. They're chthonian. They're ultimately feminine, in a way. And Odin comes to slay them, but before we even have a record of the Norse, the Roman, and the Greek mythology, we have an earlier record of myth along the same lines, which is Marduk slaying Tiamat. Tiamat is this elemental dragon goddess. She represents the chthonian feminine forces of nature, and Marduk is ennobled. He is given the kingship. He becomes the sun god, and he slays Tiamat. The hypothesis here is, if we look back at earlier forms of goddess worship in Northern Europe, the Hottentot figures, these fertility goddesses, that there was an introduction both within, we might say, the Babylonian, which is the Semitic side of thing where the Hebrews come from, but also the Indo-European, but also perhaps the Egyptian. The Egyptian example is a little less clear to me because the big power structure within the Egyptian hierarchy is between two brothers, or an uncle and a nephew, and so it's not so much gendered as male against female as in the Babylonian, and it's not so much father against son as in the Norse and Greco-Roman. So the Egyptians doesn't fit as well into the parallels I'm trying to draw in here. But in any case, there's a hypothesis that before this patriarchal culture of the sun god or the sky god or the Olympian god or the thunder god or whatever, this head god, as a masculine figure slaying some chthonian figure, a giant, a titan, a dragon, a goddess, the conquest of man over nature, which precedes science, remember, it precedes science, and there's even within the Babylonian myth, there are all these animals which seem to parallel, some of them seem to parallel the astrological signs. So it even seems to be man is slaying not only the chthonian forces of nature, but he's slaying the astrological signs. He's slaying destiny. He's severing himself from the destiny of these heavenly bodies, these feminine heavenly bodies who control fate, destiny. He's charting his own course. He's a what's the term? He's an agrarian going his own way. He's a priest going his own way. He's a warrior going his own way. He's cutting himself off from nature. So before this myth comes into being, it's possible that there was a more matriarchal view, as I've alluded to in a previous video, that there was a more compatibilist, it was less anti-nature, and you see this somewhat in the Celts, who represent the far reaches of the Indo-European tribes. The Celts, perhaps, their mythology was diluted by native Brythonic cultures. The native cultures of the British Isles were not Indo-European, and they perhaps had a more matriarchal, nature-centered, compatibilist, rather than this aggressive, patriarchal, killing nature, severing nature, the son killing the father, usurping authority, cutting yourself away from instinct, cutting yourself away, as the Greeks would say, dominating the passions with your conscious mind, with ethos, and so on. Rather than that, it seems like the Celts diluted some of that patriarchal ethos with a little bit more of a compatibilist, nature-centered approach that was native to the British Isles. And so you see a lot of this love and veneration of nature and trust in nature and a sense of destiny that's a little more pronounced than in other Indo-European mythos, and I think that's part of the reason people like the Celtic so much, and it appeals to like hippie types and feminine types, because it is more along that side of the spectrum. But the Freudian myth, ultimately, to Freud as an atheist, he's not an Orthodox Jew, but he is coming out of the Jewish tradition, and so his view is that the king, the Yahweh figure, is actually the good guy. Freud is the good guy in his own telling of the myth, and he's angry and he's looking down upon these brothers or these masses or this mob which is trying to usurp his power. In this sense, Freud and Nietzsche have something in common. Nietzsche, of course, loved the aristocrat. He didn't like the masked man. He didn't like the last man. He didn't like Christianity. He liked this idea of the aristocrat is in power, can do whatever he wants. So Yahweh and Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, there's some synchronicity there. So I think there is a kindred spirit there between Nietzsche and Freud. Whereas Jung is comfortable with the Christian ethos of, the old ways are dying away, we're going to have some new ways, Kronos and Uranus and Saturn, and these old gods are giving way to Zeus and Jupiter and the Olympians, and the giants are giving way to Odin. He's more comfortable with this. And in general, I think what this says for to look at left and right, where the right wing is this Nietzschean, Freudian, protecting the aristocrat, protecting Yahweh, making sure that the king is the king now and forever. This is also kind of the Protestant ethos, where the Bible is the Word of God, and we rest our faith upon the Bible, and it was always true now and forever, and the earth is only 6,000 years old. And they're so dogmatic. The right wing is dogmatic. The right wing places its hope in Yahweh, the aristocrat, the Übermensch, and wants this constancy. It wants everything to be frozen and cold and Apollonian and the same. And this is why it's really a death cult, because it wants to freeze time in a stasis where everything's perfect and nothing ever changes. This is the idea of Christian heaven. There's no dynamic. There's no battle between good and evil. There's no contest. Satan has been slayed. It's just simply glory and glory, hallelujah, forever. So that is the right wing, whereas the left wing is dynamic, and the left wing is about revolution. And the European mythos, as I've described it here, connected with the Babylonian mythos, is the most left-wing mythos up until that point. And the Europeans are still the most left-wing people in the world in terms of their ability to accept, embrace, and actually pursue change. This is Faustian civilization. They want to change things. They want revolution. They want something new. They're always looking for something new, something beyond the current state. Whereas the right wing just wants to petrify whatever culture is now is the best culture, or whatever culture was back in the 1950s, or whatever. They pick a golden age. They pick a time that we just want to get back to that time and keep that time and maintain those traditions, maintain those forms. So you see in the Greeks, for example, the Greeks were unique in the cultures of the world, really, at that time, and that they pursued this kind of sculptural realism that the only precedent for that is the bust of Nefertiti and some of ancient Egyptian sculpture. But really, the full-body sculptures that the Greeks come up with, the proportions, the realism there, is unprecedented. And they had pursued that for a long time. It's not that they came up with it in a single generation, but they were going at that art form and really pushing the limits of that art form for hundreds, if not thousands of years. That tradition goes back. And they finally achieved a sufficient level of realism, and then they kind of froze in that realism. And Nietzsche does evaluate this, and he says there is a point where you can look at Greek art, and he specifically looks at the drama and theater, and he said there's this tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian, and it's about the individual or the two figures. It's very limited, and that's is today the day? Let's finish this up in 30 seconds. Gotta go. 30 seconds. Now I'm under so much pressure I can't speak. So you have a Greek collapse where you introduce all these new characters. It dissolves, and then the Socratic dialogue is a revival of the Greek dialogue. And anyway, things fall apart, and rationalism comes in, skepticism comes in, Alexander the Great. The potentiality of the Greek people is unleashed in this conquest of the Middle East, which ultimately fails and dissolves. It wasn't a real thing. It looked spectacular on paper. It looked great on paper. It was a superficial thing. It dissolved, and the Greeks declined. It went away. That's what happens when you're chasing this Faustian pursuit of we just have to perfect sculpture, we just have to perfect drama, and you actually reach your goal. Once you've reached your goal, everything just dissipates and falls away. And so the principle of Tantra is that you have a goal, and you don't allow yourself to reach it, because once you reach it, the illusion that fulfilling your goal would complete the system of German idealism, or whatever you want to call it, actually reaching your goal is always disappointing. It's always disappointing if you set a goal for yourself and say, oh, I can't wait until I can do this many push-ups. I can't wait until I get this many views. I can't wait, whatever the goal that people have. I can't wait till I have this much money. And then you have that much money, and it's like, oh, this isn't really that different. I still have problems. Life is still life. I still have my emotional system, which is regulated such that it always adjusts like a thermostat. It always adjusts to the new conditions. And you psychologically, if you're starving and a single bit of bread makes you happy, well, then if you have a healthy diet, you're not going to be happy all the time. You're going to adjust to that. It's going to be normal. So the principle of Tantra is that you have to never allow yourself to reach your goal. And obviously Tantra is applied sexually in, the popular conception of that word, but psychologically it applies to everything and anything. Culturally, you have to have a principle of Tantra. You can never allow yourself to reach your goal, which is why the left wing, the Faustian spirit, has set itself up for this goal of egalitarianism, equality, anti-racism, anti-sexism, because that's a goal that can never be reached. Therefore, your society is always in tension, society is always dynamic, society is always growing and changing, never reaches that stasis point, that degeneration and decline. Now, because it is an impossible goal, there are problems associated with that. It does create internal problems. People are anxious, they're depressed, they're alienated, they don't have friends. We all know what problems are going on as a result. So it's not a perfect solution. There is no such thing as a perfect solution. But this is what European civilization has unraveled with, again, we can say that they're outside forces. Europeans don't exist in isolation on this planet. They are just 8%, which gets me to my next point. We're going over time here. But it gets me to this next point, which is white nationalists conceive of white people as the king of the world, and there are all these multifarious enemies opposing them, which is really a Freudian Nietzschean vision, as opposed to the traditional European vision, which is, or the opposite of Freud's vision, we might say, without implying too much there. The opposite of Freud's vision is not, it's bad when the king is killed by the brothers, but actually, it's good when Uranos is killed by Kronos. It's good when Kronos is killed by the Olympians. That is a good transition. That's a revolution. That's progress. And so, implicit within the European mythology is this idea that the king is bad and he must be overthrown by the good new people, the evolved form of humanity. So leftism really feeds into the traditional European view, whereas white nationalism is really closer in spirit to the Freudian view. So I'll let you chew on that. I really have to go. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Bye-bye.